As Jasmine Crockett launches her campaign for the U.S. Senate from Texas, it's worth stepping back and asking a clear question. Is she genuinely a Democratic leader for working families, or just another corporate-aligned politician wrapped in firebrand rhetoric? Crockett has become a viral figure in national politics, known as much for her flashy confrontations with Republicans as for her policy positions. But beneath the soundbites lies a candidate whose record and fundraising sources raise serious doubts about her professed priorities. Jasmine Crockett filed paperwork to run for the Democratic nomination for U.S. Senate in Texas just before the filing deadline in December 2025, thrusting her into a crowded and consequential midterm cycle. Her campaign announcement quickly grabbed headlines, not for detailed policy proposals, but for spectacle and confrontation, including a launch video that leaned heavily on former President Trump's criticism of her rather than a substantive platform. The way her candidacy has been portrayed, as both a firebrand and polarizing, points to a central tension. She energizes base voters with combative rhetoric, but there is a persistent question about whether she can or will articulate actionable solutions. Some Democrats themselves have expressed concern that her high-visibility style may not translate into broad electoral success in a statewide general election in a red state like Texas. Crockett's public persona, one built on viral moments, feuds with Republicans, and media attention, serves the party's fundraising apparatus. High name recognition means big dollars from PACs, lobbyists, and wealthy donors who view her not as a grassroots challenger, but as a marketable Democratic brand. This dynamic is classic corporate Democratic politics, a personality-driven candidate fueled by big money and national media rather than a bottom-up working-class movement. 2. Her record doesn't match her rhetoric. Crockett likes to position herself as a progressive firebrand, attacking Trump on the national stage, criticizing Republicans, and touting herself as a defender of marginalized communities. She's been a vocal supporter of civil rights issues, voting rights, and healthcare access, and she aligns with parts of the progressive agenda. Yet closer examination of her legislative behavior suggests a far more conventional Democratic profile. According to observers and analyses of her voting patterns and bill sponsorships, Crockett has not been a prolific progressive legislator in terms of actual policy outputs. She sponsors relatively few truly progressive bills, relying instead on broad applause lines rather than concrete policy leadership. Her voting record includes support for mainstream Democratic positions and even elements that align with corporate interests, such as accepting PAC money from the crypto industry and voting for legislation criticized by some progressive activists. Critics point out that her foreign policy stances and alliances with establishment groups dilute any claim to being a populist or anti-corporate voice. These critiques don't come solely from the right. Even some progressive commentators online argue that Crockett's viral antics mask a neoliberal foreign policy and corporate-friendly fundraising network. If real progressivism were measured by policy output, coalition building on labor issues, and grassroots economic empowerment, Crockett's record looks decidedly moderate and establishment-oriented, not radical. 3. Corporate money and political reality. The term corporate Democrat isn't a personal insult. It reflects a structural reality in U.S. politics. The Democratic Party's funding mechanisms often pull candidates toward compromise with corporate interests because wealthier donors and PACs hold the purse strings. Crockett, by virtue of her national profile, is a beneficiary of that system. Large contributions from industry PACs, including tech and finance sectors, suggest her Senate campaign is being underwritten by the very forces she claims to oppose. This isn't unique to Crockett, but it does undermine her claims to be a champion of working-class families. If her priorities were rooted first in those communities, her fundraising and legislative strategies would align with labor, small business owners, and grassroots movements, not big donors. The influence of corporate money affects more than messaging. It affects policy outcomes. A candidate reliant on industry PAC contributions is inevitably pulled away from bold structural reforms like Medicare for all, debt cancellation, major tax reform on corporations, or aggressive climate regulation. Crockett's campaign is banking on media buzz, not systemic transformation. 4. Overshadowed by rhetoric, not rooted in solutions. Jasmine Crockett's style is unmistakable. She leaps into feuds with opponents, delights in viral moments, and commands social media attention. But political effectiveness isn't measured in memeability. It's measured in policy wins, negotiations that improve people's lives, and building broad coalitions across diverse constituencies. A true people-centered candidate would focus on concrete economic policies for working families, raising wages, protecting union rights, expanding healthcare access, and tackling housing affordability. Deep engagement with labor movements and community organizations rather than relying on national media attention. Building coalitions that extend beyond coastal progressive enclaves into rural, suburban, and working-class communities. Crockett talks passionately about speaking for all families, yet her political strategy revolves around energizing base voters with confrontational imagery, not forging pragmatic, cross-cutting alliances needed to win in a state like Texas. You can energize a base, but if you can't persuade or win over moderates and independents, you won't flip a Senate seat in 2026. 5. Texas politics and the illusion of representation. Texas is one of the most politically significant battlegrounds in the U.S., a state with massive economic growth and deep demographic shifts. Democrats see opportunity here, but they also face entrenched Republican structures and a challenging electorate. Crockett's entry into the Senate race, especially after the withdrawal of other Democrats like Colin Allred, was heralded by some as a bold choice. However, the Texas electorate is diverse, and while urban liberal voters might appreciate Crockett's style, wide swaths of suburban and rural voters may find her approach polarizing. Even within Democratic circles, there is debate about whether her candidacy helps mobilize turnout or inadvertently consolidates Republican opposition by giving GOP messaging easy targets. In this context, calling Crockett a corporate Democrat isn't to dismiss her, it's to highlight how her campaign fits within an established, institutionally driven Democratic model. That model emphasizes fundraising, media visibility, and partisan confrontation, often at the expense of grassroots empowerment, structural economic reform, and deep voter engagement. 6. Why this matters for 2026 and beyond. The stakes in Texas and nationally could not be higher. Democrats are fighting to regain control of the Senate, and Texas represents a rare pickup opportunity if the right strategy is chosen. But election victories matter only if they lead to real progress. What's at issue isn't just whether Jasmine Crockett can win, but what she would do after winning. A corporate Democrat narrative suggests prioritizing party machinery over community roots, relying on media spectacle instead of policy substance, fundraising from establishment donors while claiming populist credibility. This pattern leads to disappointment for working-class voters who may enthusiastically support a candidate's rhetoric but see little material change once in office. Instead of positioning herself as a savior figure, Crockett should be asked to clarify how will she actually tackle inflation, healthcare cost burdens, and stagnant wages? What specific policies will she champion to defend voting rights and expand access to the ballot? How will she ensure that minorities and marginalized communities have meaningful representation beyond slogans? What is her plan for energy policy in a state like Texas, balancing environmental concerns with working-class job creation? These questions warrant answers, not catchphrases. Jasmine Crockett is undeniably charismatic, bold, and media-savvy. Those traits have helped her rise quickly within the Democratic Party and become a household name in political circles. But charisma alone does not make a champion of the people. When her record, fundraising sources, and political strategy are examined, it becomes clear that her candidacy fits within the corporate Democratic mold, a model that generates visibility, raises money, and fuels national narratives, but often fails to deliver transformative change for everyday families. if Jasmine Crockett is serious about leading for all Texans, she needs to move beyond theatrics and align her campaign with deep policy commitments that reflect the lived economic and social realities of working families, not just the institutional interests of a political class that thrives on visibility and donations. Only then can Texans judge her not as a viral personality, but as a true representative of their hopes and challenges in Washington.